Welcome once again to Decluttering 55 Plus with Michelle Passoff. I am Michelle Passoff. This is the place to come for news you can use to get things done in life without anything in the way on the road ahead. This is a podcast where we'll talk about letting go of conventional clutter, like clothes and papers and other paraphernalia, so that stuff doesn't get in your way. But that's not all. We will pull out from under the carpet other areas of life that are confounding and confronting, and we'll call that clutter. Instead of brushing those topics out of the way to be dealt with later or never, our aim is to talk about it, gain clarity, get excited, move into action, and be complete. We're going to change our minds about what stops us and open space to keep going. Topics will include writing your life story, digital decluttering, relationship, where you'll move and what you'll do next in life. And we'll also dive into financial matters and everything we need to know about making your final arrangements. In the end, we'll hope those conversations will help invigorate your life and create a legacy, not a mess. So let's get started. When we think about what we're going to leave to the next generation, we commonly think of who we're going to give money to and how much, or who gets the favorite set of china or grandma's silverware. We often overlook the value of leaving a life story so the next generation can know your experience, understand its history, and gain some wisdom. Let's talk about why it's important to leave a life story. I'm so excited to introduce to you Richard Stone. Richard and I met for the first time more than 20 years ago on a ferry from Block Island in Rhode Island, and here he is all these years later to share with us his experience as a leading authority on the importance and art of storytelling. Please welcome the author of The Healing Art of Storytelling and Story Intelligence, Richard Stone. Richard, let's get at it.
Okay.
Welcome.
I stepped on your line. Yeah.
First, tell us, how did you come to be an expert on storytelling? How did it become your passion?
It was not something I grew up saying, hey, I want to be a storyteller when I grow up. But a number of years ago, I have a dear friend, Hedy Schleifer, and we were involved with an organization that was trying to get Jews and Arabs together to have a meaningful and peaceful conversation to explore their stories, really. And out of that, we used to do fundraisers, and someone said, you guys are very funny. You should do an evening of comedy. And we said, as a fundraiser, we said, okay. And the committee got together, and this was in Orlando, Florida, Winter Park. And we worked all summer on our best jokes. And at the end of the summer, I invited a good friend of mine over who had a lot of theater experience. Say, we'd like to kind of do a run through with you and see what you think. And at the end, he looked at us and said, don't do this.
Yeah.
You'll humiliate yourselves. And serendipitously, I was out backpacking just shortly after that out west. And I'm flying back with a couple people, and they said, hey, have you ever been to the National Storytelling Festival? And I said, what's that? I had no idea what that was. And we had dinner, they invited me over, I invited them over. They had a camper that they were going to drive up and said, you want to come? And I said, sure. And we went up, and there I'm sitting listening to a guy named Michael Cotter, who was a farmer from Minnesota, whose life experiences are probably as far away as anything from mine.
Right.
And I have an epiphany. I'm thinking, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, is telling stories. And I came back, I said to Hedy, what we need to do is tell our life story. So she said, you're right. And we sat down and started writing, and we created a show called Shtick and Stone.
Oh, that's funny.
Which were stories about our growing up. But we also brought in two characters. One was an amalgamation of my grandfather's. I called him Morris Zavitsky. And hers was an amalgamation of her grandmother's, Edna Zippelbaum. And so we would change characters occasionally and talk though we were that character. And so some of it was the stories that we grew up with about, our grandparents, and weaving those together with our own personal stories. And it was a big hit. We had about 250 people at a nightclub, and I was in the ad business at the time, which was a kind of storytelling. Sure. And my business was for sale. Soon after that, the business sold. I met my wife, Elizabeth, who you met there on that ferry on Block Island. And my life went to, took a quick right turn, 90-degree turn, and I dove into the world of story. So, and there's a lot more to it, but that's
can you define what is storytelling?
Well, I think fundamentally, storytelling, if you say the word storytelling, it can mean a lot of things.
Exactly.
We think about entertainment, You go to the movies, you read a novel. That's good storytelling, hopefully, if it's the author or the producer or director, done a good job, scriptwriter's done a good job. But at a personal level, storytelling is about sharing our life experiences with others. That's sort of the simple term, kind of a boiling it down. It is sitting down with others and in an authentic way, reminiscing, sharing the things that have impacted our lives, maybe brought us pleasure, some things that have been difficult and challenging that we've gotten through, that we can now look back on and go, boy, that was a tough time, but here I am. I made it through that.
So not all storytelling is memoir writing or memoir.
No, yeah, we were talking earlier about that. The memoir is an art form, I think. It's writing a book. And I don't think everyone's a writer, or even a good writer. So I don't think that we should task everyone to say, you should write your memoir. Now, some people have had some pretty darn interesting lives.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a rabbi I worked with, David Zeller, who I got to know real well for a number of years. And he had a really fascinating life. He had been a sadhu, with a begging bowl in India. His parents were Jungian psychologists. He sat on Carl Jung's lap at one point. He had met all these interesting people, and he ended up, that story was really interesting and worth sharing. But, for your family to leave memories of things that you've gone through, I think is a great, invaluable service to them. But it's not the only form. Some people are just better orally. So if you want to capture your parents or your grandparents or great grandparents' story, sometimes just sitting down with them with a recorder, not with a video. Video can be very intimidating for people because how do I look? My hair doesn't look so great. And sometimes people, at the end of their life, they don't look so good. But their voice is still vibrant and still whole. And so sometimes it's better just to audio record the stories.
So whether you write the story or videotape the story or audio tape the story, why is it meaningful?
Well, I think that the process of telling our stories becomes even more important as we sort of, somewhere in our 50s, we go around a turn age-wise. Mm. And it becomes more important to look back than to look forward. And we start spending time reflecting on the things that have happened in the past. Are the horizons for us in the future are, getting shorter and shorter? Are the things that we're going to be able to accomplish? And so I think the life demands on us are different spiritually and physically. And so the process of reflecting on our life gives us a sense of its meaning and cohesion and coherence. How have things fit together? What has this journey been all about? Gosh, I've had all these weird things happen, or these difficult things and these good things. How do they all knit together? And in the process of reflecting on them, we make meaning. We find relevance. We find connectivity. We find aliveness. And sometimes, when we're going through something, it doesn't seem significant. It's only later in telling about it that it actually can nurture us in a very profound way.
And besides the benefit that it gives to you, what is the benefit that it has for future generations?
Well, there's a lot of work that's been done on what's been called intergenerational storytelling. And our stories, we don't always realize that. I call them our narrative assets.
Oh, that's
is that we have these wonderful assets that we've accumulated in our life, and we can't put a dollar value on them, but they're richer than that.
Yeah.
They're more valuable than that. And it turns out there's some wonderful researchers. I'm in the Atlanta area here at Emory, Marshall Duke and Robin Feibush. They spent 30 years looking at intergenerational storytelling. I had a student years ago when I was teaching at the university in Orlando, and he was somewhat depressed, and he had come from a divorced family. He knew nothing. He had no relation with his father, and he had an Irish last name. And I said, go find out who your people are. Mm. And his first name was Alexander. And the next week he came back and he was a changed person. He found out his people came from such and such a village in Ireland, and this village has a history. And suddenly he found his people, and he looked up Alexander the Great, who, had quite an interesting, life. And suddenly he realized he'd been named, that was his namesake. he suddenly felt a sense of connectivity to the past. He had a sense of his place in the world. And we need that.
And
We
once
need
your
that.
parents or your grandparents are gone, you can't ask them the questions that suddenly occur to you. So better
No,
to
and
get
that's,
those
that's what a
questions
loss.
answered now.
Yeah, I think of trying to recover those past stories as like archaeologists. They find a little pottery shard, and it's this little piece of clay, and they go, "What was this?" Well, I think maybe it was a bowl, and here's another piece of clay over here, and how do we put them together? I grew up with a story when I was growing up that my grandfather stole his brother's ticket to come to America. And of course, I never sat down and said, we didn't call him Grandpa, we called him George by his first name. I said, George, what was that about? No one ever explained what that was about. And then George, developed some dementia. It was, by the time I was a teenager, he would not have been able to share that story. So no one knows about that story, but there is a kind of a postscript to that story. I was talking to my aunt and uncle. My uncle said, well, the question was, did he ever pay to bring his brother over? That's a really remarkable thing. And indeed, he did. But what happened, my uncle grew up in Lima, Ohio during the Depression. And there was a man who lived above the building that my grandfather owned for his janitorial business, who sort of was the superintendent of the building, took care of things, and was from another country, didn't speak very good English. And when the man died, he discovered it was his uncle.
Oh, no.
So, what was that about?
Yeah.
He did bring his brother over, but maybe by the time he could pay, because my grandfather, George, came over at age 13. So maybe he brought him over 15 years later when he had finally earned enough money to send back. And by then it was an older brother. He was probably in his 30s at that point of time, God knows. And he couldn't make it in America. And George must have felt some terrible shame about his brother, that, his brother wasn't kind of with it. God, who knows? So I ended up making up a story about that, trying to imagine what it was like for George at 13, hearing about his brother talking about America, and when his brother came home with the ticket and said he finally earned the money for the ticket, George couldn't resist.
Well, you bring up a good point, and that's why I call it telling your side of the life story, because something could happen and everybody in the family can have a different take on what occurred. And if you get to tell your life story, you get your side of the story is what lasts from generation to generation and not hearsay from somebody else. So
yeah, there's no video replay. There's been a wonderful commercial playing where some people were having an argument about something that happened, and they said, oh, okay, let's look at the replay. And they come in with a little computer and go, well, yeah, see what happened. We don't have that. And the truth is that experience is mostly interpretive. We often think it's perceptual, but it's interpretive. So if you have a father who's a very strict person, one sibling thinks that father, always is on my case. And the other sibling kind of needed the structure. It was, was thankful the dad set some limits. And they will grow up with two very different stories about the same things that happened. And it's not that one story is true and the other is false. They're just different ways of seeing it. They had different relevance and meaning for each of those siblings. So we have to understand that there's, because, siblings get together, over the holidays and they're talking about something that happened and, oh, dad never did that. Oh, where were you? I wasn't there. Yes, you were there, but, we don't remember it in the same ways.
At what age do you think is a good time to start thinking about telling your life story? We only have a few more minutes, so if you could
So
guide us on that.
I think this becomes the task of those of us who are in their 50s, 60s, and certainly, moving up beyond that age-wise. That's a time for reflection and harvesting. It's beginning to harvest your life. And not to say that you don't have a lot of life ahead of you and that it can be rich and rewarding, but it becomes, I think, spiritually an important task for us to sometimes clean up the stuff that's sort of from the past.
Good point.
We may be schlepping, along with us. You're about decluttering stuff. We're maybe schlepping along with resentments and anger or things that happen where we're still activated by those things. It's time to sort of clean that stuff up and put it on the shelf and sort of be able to look at it and go, okay, well, that was not an easy experience, but it no longer has me by the throat,
And therein lies the topic of your book, The Healing Art of Storytelling and Storytelling Intelligence by Richard Stone. So get yourself focused on the merit and importance of sharing your life story with future generations. If you have comments or questions or your own experience to share, please be in touch with us by going to our website, www.decluttering55plus.com. Navigate to the Let's Connect page and send us a message. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to us on YouTube. And by all means, rate us on the podcast platform where you're listening from today so we can continue to build this community and keep the conversation going. Thanks so much for being with us today, and have a clutter-free day. Bye now.